Okay, well, good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me. If you can't, then just let me know on the chat if I'm too loud, if I'm too quiet. A lot of you will know the drill. To those who are joining the choir for the first time for this course, welcome. We are so pleased to have you with us. It's so wonderful to have people from all over the world, new faces, old faces, and yes, hello to those old faces as well. It's so nice to see familiar names in the chat. And wow, you've been chatting away before I've got here. Fantastic. Well, as you'll see, I'm not in the same place as I was for the Mahler thing. I've moved house. New place, and but we have for this course new music as well. An amazing piece by Beethoven, this, a real treat to sing, and just like the Mahler, the kind of piece that you would have thought in the current circumstances would be impossible, but with the Self-Isolation Choir we make it more than possible. We make it this most amazing experience where you can sing it from the comfort of your own home. As you can see, I'm in the comfort of my own home, and I have the pleasure to be able to speak to you from here. Someone is saying a little louder. Yep, I can turn myself up, no problem. How is that? A bit better? Well, let me know if it's still too quiet. Let me just try the piano, because sometimes the piano is too loud, I'm too quiet. How's this then? How's that? I can still turn myself up a little bit more, maybe just to be on the safe side. Great, okay. People say better. Still quiet? I'll turn it up more. Okay, right. Well, let me know if it looks like my internet connection's good as well, so hopefully we'll be in for a safe ride. Yeah, I'm afraid my piano has not been tuned since even before the Mahler, so we're getting slowly flatter over here, but don't let that put you off. Wow, so many people. Hello, everybody. Hello, Denise. Hello, Helena. Hello, Joanne. Hello, Paul and Nancy. This is just great. It looks like we've got a big choir for this, which is perfect because it's it's such a kind of hearty piece to get our teeth into. Today we're just going to I'm going to sort of chat a little bit, introduce you to the piece, introduce you to the music, introduce you to Beethoven in case you didn't know who he was, and talk a little bit about the orchestra who you're going to be singing this with, the soloists you're going to be singing it with, who've also recorded the guide tracks for you, which should be I hope will be really helpful for when you're recording it and for when we're learning it together. It means you don't need to listen to me singing it all the time, which I can tell you is a blessing. And yeah, and I will we'll do a little sort of chat about the music, and then a gentle warm-up, and then just a little gentle sing through a couple of the kind of best bits, but nothing too stressful for a first rehearsal, just something to whet our appetites and kind of get us into it. But I hope that after this rehearsal you can kind of go away and have another listen to it and kind of really kind of start to connect with the piece, because we're so lucky to have these 2 weeks of rehearsals to really kind of get under the skin of it, in a way that in many ways you don't quite get to in a normal rehearsal. You don't get to answer back in the way that you can on this. I love the way I can see you chatting, asking questions. I want it to be a really open environment. Wow, Gaynor Kirby says he did the Mahler and he did the Elgar Nimrod. Wow, so he played in the Self-Isolation Orchestra. If you haven't heard of the Self-Isolation Orchestra, check it out. We did an amazing performance of Nimrod last year, and I've got a couple of extremely exciting things lined up for later this year. Talking of extremely exciting things, if you think Mahler 2 was a blast and you think this is going to be a blast, have a look at the Mahler 8 course that we've got going on later this year. We've spread it out over a nice long period, so we've got loads of time to get into what is an enormous and amazing, unique piece known as the Symphony of 1000 for a reason. And I'm sure that both that and Mahler 2 were deeply inspired by Beethoven's Ninth. So in a way, it's kind of good that for this course, we can get stuck into the inspiration for so much amazing music that came after it. So I'll just wait for a couple more. Wow, we've got lots of people joining. It's fantastic. Wait for a couple more people to join, and then in 2 or 3 minutes' time, we can do a little warm-up and get singing as well. I hope you have got your scores. There is a score with my markings on it, which might be really helpful, which I'm sure Mark will be able to share with you if he hasn't already, because in Beethoven, writing a long time before Mahler, they weren't quite as specific in writing down what they wanted as Mahler was. Mahler was, in fact, excessively specific in some ways. He couldn't write a note without writing exactly how to sing it. Whereas Beethoven, sometimes it's helpful to have a little helpers here and there to kind of so we're all on the same page. So I hope that will get circulated. There's also a really helpful video by Lucy Cox, who is the soprano who's singing the solo in this, about the pronunciation of the German in this piece, which I think Mark would have shared with you. I think there's a kind of shared folder which you can all see. Lucy goes really clearly through all the German to explain how to pronounce it for those of you who aren't so familiar with the language. It can be a little bit counterintuitive sometimes, German. But the great thing about this piece is that it's not that long in terms of the text, and you get the same wonderful words over and over again. So we can really kind of get familiar with the words. And very often the soloists sing the words first, and then we as the chorus kind of answer them back. So it's a great way of getting used to the text as well. And we'll always go over what the text means, so you can be really confident with kind of what you're singing and kind of why you're singing it, because I think that's extremely important. You're always welcome to pause me, rewind. You can't fast forward, unfortunately, but you can take the rehearsal at your own speed, and you're also always welcome to the rehearsals that aren't for your voice part. So even if you're not a bass, join the bass rehearsal on Monday evening. You might learn something you wouldn't have learnt in your own rehearsals, and kind of vice versa. If you want another kind of crack at it, it's all the same music. We almost always sing at the same time. So there we go. Oh yes, and Mark says, yeah, of course you will probably know Lucy because she sings in the Fieri consort. And I think she did that wonderful Strauss Morgan video for you at Christmas time, that kind of Christmas present that Mark sent round. So she's a great singer. And she's been joined by 3 of her colleagues from Sansara Choir, which is an absolutely wonderful choir. It's kind of a similar concept to Fieri, really. A small number of really the top singers in the country, who are, I know, thrilled to be doing this project with us. They've loved, getting into this music, because actually it's not the kind of music that, as a cappella choir, you get to sing very often. Even though it's music that everyone knows and everyone loves. So I know they absolutely have loved the opportunity. They are amazing singers. It's a treat. It's been a treat for me, hearing them on the guide tracks for the recordings. So I think you're in for a treat in terms of listening to them. So. Let's, it's 8 o'clock, and wow, we've got tons of you here. It's absolutely brilliant. So, I'm sure many of you know a lot about Beethoven already, so I'm sorry if I tell you things you already know. And feel free, if I miss out something that you think is worth knowing about Beethoven, just chuck it in the chat and we can all share the knowledge, because you kind of gone through last year without probably being told that it was his 250th birthday, which for sort of someone who's probably the most famous composer of all time is a big deal. And of course it was a great shame in many ways that last year was about the worst possible year for a composer to have an anniversary, because almost none of the concerts that were, millions of concerts that were planned to celebrate this birthday went ahead. We are, unfortunately, in this choir, we don't get stopped by pandemics. So this project can go ahead. I suspect Beethoven's Ninth Symphony has not been performed for about a year at this point. So we are a unique enterprise in keeping this amazing music alive, to mark what will be, I'm sure, a sort of 2-year celebration of Beethoven's 250th anniversary. So in many ways, here we are, last day of January, kicking off what will be, I suspect, the delayed year to celebrate Beethoven 250. So you're lucky to be part of this very special project. Yeah, so Beethoven, where was he from? Well, he was German. He was born in a town called Bonn, which is in North Germany. He was not from a particularly affluent family. He was taught music by his father originally, but quite early, I think being a clearly ambitious man he moved to Vienna, which was, and still is in many ways, the kind of city of music. And I hope and I presume we have a couple of people from Germany and Austria perhaps joining us. In fact, yes, Norbert. It's Beethoven time, looking for this. Greetings from Frankfurt. There we go, Frankfurt. I mean, not that far from Bonn. Yeah, and he never really left Vienna after that point. He stayed there even through when Vienna was besieged by Napoleon. In fact, that was the great turning point in Beethoven's kind of opinion of Napoleon. He was originally a big fan. He thought Napoleon was kind of the new leader of the free world. Dedicated the Third Symphony, the Eroica, to him. But as Napoleon kind of, as happens with all dictators, kind of grew in confidence and grew overconfident and hubristic, declared himself emperor, Beethoven, in a fit of fury, tore off the front page of his Eroica Symphony, which had the dedication to Napoleon, so it's why it's no longer actually dedicated to him. But he wrote, some of his greatest works, the Emperor Concerto, for example, the Fifth Piano Concerto, was written in a basement while Vienna was being bombed by Napoleon, besieged by Napoleon, which is quite an extraordinary thought that he could write such kind of joyous music in such a ghastly circumstance. But I suppose that was really the kind of, Europe in that time, sort of a couple of decades either side of 1800, it was defined by the French Revolution and by Napoleon, and by this sense that kind of, people could conquer vast swathes of land, and that there could be freedom for everybody, and that, overthrowing monarchies and that kind of thing. And Beethoven was massively swept away by this sentiment, and that's why so much of his music has this kind of vigor, this kind of heroic character to it, because that was very much what you might say the kind of zeitgeist of the time, which he was fully kind of behind. What's the most famous thing about Beethoven? I suppose the fact that he went deaf. And he really did. He was born in 1770 and he started going deaf in the kind of late 1790s. So when he was about my age, he started going deaf, which for someone of his kind of talent and ambition, and by that point he had pretty much achieved the closest thing to world fame, as world fame was possible in those days. And not only did he start to go deaf, but he started to get tinnitus, which, not only can you not hear things, but you can hear things that you don't want to hear. I just can't imagine how awful it would have been. And I think the kind of shame of it made him kind of try and keep it from people for a long time. I think only his closest friends really started to realise, and he slowly retreated from society, having been an extremely active society man. I think you'd struggle to walk into a coffee house in Vienna in 1800 and not find Beethoven sitting there reading the newspaper. The biggest problem, apart from the difficulty it caused him composing, was that he couldn't play the piano in concerts, couldn't conduct concerts anymore once he went deaf, which is his main source of income. So I think it was a major trouble for him. But he did keep writing music, astonishingly, for another 30 years, by the end of which he was pretty much stone deaf. I think he could hear very low frequencies, which sometimes you can kind of tell in the music. There's often a kind of preference for the kind of lower register as well as the higher register. But yeah, an extraordinary amount of music, an extraordinary amount of outpouring of music, really, that he created despite not being able to hear. In fact, supposedly there are images. In fact, I think they still exist. The ear trumpets he used, these huge sort of hilarious contraptions that he used to try and hear. But when he was writing, he would put a pencil in his mouth, touch the pencil onto the top of the wood of the piano, so he could feel the vibrations of the piano through his teeth when he would play, and that's how he would write music sometimes. Kind of extraordinary kind of determination. Yeah, Brenda says, is it true that his father beat him, which added to the deafness? Yeah, that is a rumor. I don't know. That he's, it's he's one of those figures where there are so many different stories. There is a wonderful story about which a friend of mine in Vienna told me, which is that their great grandmother said that she had the most terrible tenant when she was a landlady in Vienna, and they would leave the place just filthy, and there would just be this awful noise most of the time because he was kind of banging away at the piano as though he couldn't hear anything, and he was rude. He wouldn't pay his rent on time. Anyway, that person was Beethoven. So good composer, not a good tenant, I think is the write-up we get from that one. Anyway, so it's this piece, this Ninth Symphony, comes in a kind of amazing point in his career, right towards the end of it. He hadn't written a symphony for years, about over a decade by this point. And having been extremely famous, a lot of the later pieces he wrote in life were considered a bit too weird. Things like the late quartets, for example. The Viennese kind of went off him. They kind of felt he'd passed his prime. They thought he'd kind of gone deaf and gone mad, both of which were partly true. But this Ninth Symphony, first time he appeared in public in 12 years, was an enormous triumph. I mean, a mixed triumph in that Beethoven insisted on conducting it, even though he couldn't hear a thing. So he stood there at the front. The actual conductor of the orchestra, the Viennese orchestra at the time, stood next to him and conducted at the same time, and had told the players to ignore Beethoven, who nonetheless stood there and kind of turned pages and waved violently, and and at the end, the audience raised the roof with applause. They absolutely loved it, and Beethoven couldn't hear, and Beethoven was still conducting because he didn't realise that the piece had ended. And he had to be turned round. He had to be turned round by the conductor to see that the audience were applauding him. Which just there's something kind of quite moving about that story. That he kind of was so committed to the music, even though he couldn't hear it, and had almost sort of forgotten that there were people behind him. It was actually premiered. Interesting English connection for those of you in England. An English connection with this piece. It was premiered by the London Philharmonic Society, who were desperate to get Beethoven to come to England. England, for a long time, really until kind of the early 20th century, had very few famous composers, but we loved getting foreign composers, people like Dvorak, and Haydn and Handel. None of them British. We loved getting them to England and to hear their music. And they were desperate to get Beethoven, so they commissioned this symphony from him, paid him for it. Beethoven clearly, I don't think, ever had any real intention of going to London or having the piece played there. He was determined to get it premiered in Berlin, because by then he thought that Vienna, kind of taste of music in Vienna had deteriorated. They were too into the Italian composers like Rossini and so on, who got wonderful composers, but Beethoven didn't like them. So he was determined to get it premiered in Berlin. He was being paid to have it premiered in London, and his friends convinced him eventually to get it premiered in Vienna. So there we go. And maybe one last kind of interesting fact, which is relevant to us in a way, in terms of kind of where the choir is. These days, obviously, a chorus 99 times out of 100 stands behind the orchestra in a performance. In Beethoven's day, they stood in front of the orchestra, which is a very weird concept. I've never ever seen it done in that way. But they stood directly in front, I think so you could hear them better, which is sometimes a problem. Anyway, so in Beethoven's time, they stood in front. These days, they stand behind. With us, you stand in your living room. You can stand wherever you like. You can sit. You can lie down if you want to and sing. So there we go. All right, let's do a little warm-up just to kind of get our voices going. And I think maybe the best way to warm up originally is just to hum this famous tune, the Ode to Joy. So any octave you like. Starts on an F sharp, and just hum this famous tune. We'll do it a couple of times. 1, 2. Good stuff. Perfect for a warm-up, really. Really kind of nice sort of gentle melody. It's a terribly simple melody, really. I mean, it sounds, you know, it's kind of folk song element. You could almost, you know, there's almost something kind of German beer hall about it. That kind of sort of gritty, what's the word? Yeah, kind of folkishness about it. It's certainly not highbrow as a melody. I hope the piano is not too loud, not too quiet, and I hope it's not too out of tune. But there we go. It means you won't be able to tell whether it's me singing out of tune or the piano playing out of tune. Great, good little warm-up. Let's do a couple of others. Let's just keep humming for now, and then we'll go into some vowels. Here's a C and a G. So just going in fifths, up and then down again. Going up in semitones. Now, now E, 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 then one more, E. Very good. Great. I don't think we need to do a huge amount more. Let's just perhaps do a couple of kind of more open ones. Bella Signora. Nice kind of Italian words. Really get our kind of consonants going as well as our vocal cords. So, Bella Signora. Going up. Bella Signora. Bella Signora. Bella Signora. Big deep breath. Bella Signora. Bella Signora. Very good. And then to kind of round things off, let's sing the tune once more, but to R. So, R. There's your F sharp. Great, well done. As we'll find, that tune, you know, is kind of refracted, seen from every possible angle in this movement. It's a theme of variations. It's kind of a very simple musical form. You just take a theme, very simple melody, and just go through it over and over again, changing it bit by bit, kind of making it bigger, making it smaller, making it kind of more complicated, making it simpler, different words. And it's going to be one of the really fun things about learning this piece that I'm really looking forward to, is that we can really get inside, you know, how Beethoven kind of treats this tune, which we all know so well, and is kind of sometimes kind of hidden carefully in different bits of this piece, and you might not necessarily know it's there. So, I thought before we do a bit more singing, it'd be worth kind of chatting briefly about what happens before you sing. Because this piece was a kind of a bit of a coup when it was premiered. It was really the first time that a chorus or singers had been used as part of a symphony. A symphony is traditionally an orchestral genre, so it's only instruments. And Beethoven, there are plenty of kind of theories and explanations for why he wrote what he did, but I think the most compelling one really is that Beethoven, throughout his life, kind of expanded what music could say, what music could express. You know, went from kind of, the deepest emotions, kind of the highest mountains, and perhaps by this piece, his last symphony, late into his life, he felt that he reached the limit of what music could express. And so what do you need to break through that barrier? You need words on top of it. And it's actually that's kind of very dramatically brought out in this piece. So how does it start? This is the last movement. And it starts in this kind of terrifying way, this kind of monster chord. I'll try not to play it too loudly. And then we get kind of chaos, a real kind of musical depiction of chaos. And then after that, it kind of comes to a kind of abrupt stop. Really rhetorical. And then we get this melody, not the famous melody. Kind of melancholic. And Beethoven writes in the character of a recitative. A recitative being the bit in an opera where they're not singing an aria, they're not singing a kind of like a set piece, like a number, but they're just singing almost as though they're speaking, and that's why it's quite free. You could set any words to it. Yum dum dum da 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 dee dum da. There's that low register. Maybe he could hear that bit. So kind of scary noise, and then interesting melody, and then the noise, the big scary chord, comes back. And then here we go. Here's our recitative again. So it's like at the beginning it's as though people are singing. It's the cellos and basses, but it's written like somebody's singing, kind of saying maybe something's going to happen here. And then one of the great things about doing the last movement only is that the last movement begins with a kind of recap of the whole symphony. So after that moment, we get the music from the very beginning of the symphony. Which Beethoven wrote to sound a bit like when we in an orchestra we tune to an A, and you always hear the orchestra going at the beginning of a concert. And he wrote this bit of music that sounds, it's like, has the piece actually started yet? And then that gets rudely interrupted by that recitative, which is kind of getting more and more restless. And then it kind of peters out again. And then what do we get? We get a recap of the second movement, which is a scherzo. It's really lively. Really fleeting moment, extremely unusual, kind of groundbreaking at the time. And then, okay, was that the second movement? Oh no, we're back in the finale. The recitative comes back in a kind of friendlier mood, mysterious, and then it kind of melts in the third movement, beautiful slow movement. Again, just a fleeting glimpse, like a kind of memory of that movement. Really impetuous now. But then, at the moment where you think, wow, it's getting really stressful, it just... we get that little glimmer of the theme that we all know. And then, a bit more kind of impetuousness. like the recitative is kind of being convinced into this kind of more majestic mood. Affirmative cadence. And that's our introduction. What happens next? Whispered is the theme. Which we've just sung. And bit by bit he varies it. Really beautiful imaginative ways. And it just builds and builds and builds and builds until we get this kind of grand statement of the theme. Which again kind of gets into a kind of builds up a real head of steam until what happens? Dramatic. Our scary chord comes back. Kind of moment of really high drama. And that is the moment when we've been through a kind of recap of the whole symphony. We've introduced this beautiful new theme, kind of indulged ourselves in it, but then the kind of horrors of the beginning of the movement come back. That's the moment when a singer enters. And it's a baritone solo. He's called Tom. You'll hear him. And he says, "Oh friends, not these sounds." To say, "Oh, that's horrible. Don't disagree with each other." And the orchestra kind of says, "Maybe it was a bit much." He says, "Instead, let's sing something more pleasant. Perhaps something more joyful." And then what's the word that comes next? Freude. Joy. German word for joy. And that is where we come in. So there's a kind of crash course in the beginning of this movement. Like I say, it's a great movement to do on its own because it kind of reminds you what's happened before. You sort of don't need the first three movements in a funny way. I mean, if you don't know them, go and listen to them because they're amazing. But there's a kind of recap and a kind of conclusion that there's no real solution. This music is too stressful. What do we need? We need singers. And so this baritone kind of kicks it off and he says, "Freude." And then the basses and the chorus go, "Freude," kind of really affirming it. And one by one we all come in and then the rest is history, as they say. So let's have a little crack at singing this. So this is, in my score, page 8, where it says Allegro assai. In the score I've marked up, there should be a green A, but if you haven't got that one, don't worry. It's where it says Allegro assai. I hope you can find it. It's just where the chorus basses start singing. It's a page before letter D, which is where the altos and tenors join the basses, singing Deine Zauber binden wieder. So just shout if you, but I think we're all on the same edition of the same vocal score, so I think our page numbers should be the same. Let's just have a go singing it. We'll do it with the master track, which is sort of pre-recorded of me playing the piano, with Tom singing the solo and Sansara, the wonderful choir, singing the kind of guide voices for you. So you've always got them in your ear, so you can sing with them, as well as, of course, singing with each other. And that means I can conduct you. So I'm going to go from the top of page 8. We can listen to the brief kind of stress in the orchestra, and then Tom enters and says, "Stop, there's a better way." So do a quick kind of sound check on this. I hope it's not too loud. How's the volume on that? I hope it's alright. So this is end of page 7. No, yeah, that's it. So in the middle of the page 7 there it says presto. That's where we'll hear a really scary chord. Brief moment of kind of ambiguousness. And then assertive, and then it all goes wrong. and a moment of real crisis, and then just before we get there, let's all sing Freude. Where it says chorus bases, we'll sing it together. Just to kind of give it a kind of kickstart. So here we go. Just before the Allegro assai. Ooh. Give me 1 second. My laptop's about to run out of battery. There we go, we're safe. Alright, so what you're going to hear is the piano goes, and the baritone will go Freude, and you respond by going Freude. Happens twice. Okay, I'll bring you in. Great. That's the idea. Great start. In some ways, I think it's a shame that he doesn't get the whole choir to sing that bit. But there's something kind of gloriously macho about the bass section just kind of yelling back at the baritone soloist. Okay, is everyone happy about where we are? We might have different editions. One of the frustrating things about the edition I'm using is it doesn't have bar numbers. But if you find the first chorus entry and just work back, which is figure D, if you've got, I hope you've got figures. Just before figure D, you'll see where the first solo baritone entry is. And then just after that, it says Allegro assai, which means kind of quite fast in Italian. And then there we get that first bass chorus entry, Freude. Great. Okay, so we'll do that once more, and then we'll listen to Tom sing his little couple of lines, and then at figure D, we all sing the same thing. We all go, Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mörder streng geteilt. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel weit. Sopranos, just join with the altos. It was all the same melody. Okay, so let's go back a little bit. Excuse me, I just need to plug my other computer in. Problem with old computers, they last about 10 minutes without being plugged in. Okay, so we're going, it's probably about 20 bars before letter D, just from that first bass entry. You can all sing it together. Then we listen to Tom sing for a little bit, and then we all come in at D. Don't worry, if you're not confident with the German, we'll do that later. Just sing anything. Okay, here we go. Freude, Freude, Freude
schöne Götterfunkentochter aus Elysium, wir betreten feuertrunken himmlische dein Heiligtum. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode strenge treibt. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel weilt. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode strenge treibt. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel weilt.
Well done. Let's keep going. Soloists.
Eines Freundes Freund, darin wir ein holdes Weib erlungen, mische seinen Jubel ein Jahr für auch eine Seele sein nimmt auf dem Erdenrund.
Okay, ready, basses, you're first. 1, 2, 1, 2, ja.
Ja, wer auch nur eine Seele sein nimmt auf dem Erdenrund, und wirst nie der Kopf der Stiere weinen sich aus diesem Mund.
Great. Well done. So that's our little first entry as a chorus. One of the more gentle moments in the piece. Beethoven was a slightly uncompromising writer for the voice, shall we say. I don't think he minded too much what was easy and what was difficult. I think he just cared what the notes were. Some of it sits remarkably easily, some of it sits remarkably awkwardly, but we'll find our way around the awkward moments. There are plenty of kind of ways to kind of get on top of them. And the wonderful thing about this is you can just do it as much as you like. Practice the bits you like, and the bits you like, the bits you don't like, the more difficult bits as much as you like, until you're confident with them. And when you come to record it, you've got as many chances as you like. And what I've done is I've split the piece up into different sections, sort of bite-sized chunks. So when we come to record it, you're never going to have to sing the whole thing from beginning to end, which is extremely tiring, and actually more tiring in some ways when you're recording it. There's a lot more pressure when you're recording. So I've made it into kind of manageable sections so you can record section by section. Those of you who did the Mahler will be familiar with this. Let's perhaps sing one more bit, the famous bit, which is, we'll skip the one of the tougher bits, which is figure G. Let's jump ahead quite a long way to figure M, if you can find figure M. In my score, it's page 25. It's where the full choir we sing Freude schöne Götterfunken Tochter aus Elysium. As you're finding that, letter M, those of you who heard the Mahler, you'll be familiar with my Orchestra for the Earth. We've recorded the entire of this movement, the whole thing, all 25 minutes of it, completely remotely, using this amazing thing that we can do. Thanks to kind of Mark's ingenuity in pioneering this whole thing, that we're able to record these pieces from our own homes, which means that we can record it with only about 20 players who each play multiple parts. So the flautist has recorded all the flute parts, the violins between them. I think we've got 4 violinists who've recorded about 16 violin tracks between them, and so on and so forth. So you've got what is in the recording a full-size Beethoven orchestra of sort of 50, 60, 70 players, done by a much smaller group, and I will play you little bits of it as we get through the rehearsals to kind of get you warmed up into what the orchestra sound like. They sound brilliant, and it's a real thrill to sing with them. We'll do little bits of singing with them, lots of singing with the piano as well. It's sometimes a bit overwhelming singing with the orchestra. It's sometimes hard to hear the guide voice as well with the orchestra. So sometimes the piano, I think, is good for kind of rehearsal purposes. But as we start getting through to the kind of run-throughs, we can sing with the orchestra, and I can tell you that is going to be a huge thrill. So this is letter M. We'll go from a little bit before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. About 18 or so bars before letter M. I'll bring you in. Again, this is just for fun, so just sing what you want. Take it as it comes. We'll go all the way through to the Andante maestoso. And then we can give ourselves a pat on the back. Right, let me just find it. That sounds about right. Okay. about 10 bars before or so. Kind of comes out of nowhere, this moment. 1, 2.
Freude, schöne Götter, funkeln durch der Erlösung, wie betreten Feuer, trunken himmlische dein Heiligtum, deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode streng geteilt, alle Menschen werden glühen, vor dein sanfter Flügel weit. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode streng geteilt, alle Menschen werden glühen, vor dein sanfter Flügel weit.
Great. Can't help but put a smile on your face, that bit. What a glorious bit of music. Well, I hope that made some sense. Like I say, the great thing about this is that we're going to go through this piece in sort of wonderful detail, really kind of get to know it, so you can feel confident with your part, and so you can sing it like you can feel in control when you sing it. I think that's the main thing. You know, you can practice as much as you like. You can always watch back the rehearsals. Mark will send round the guide tracks which you'll use to record, so you can always practice with them as well. I've made it so that, on Mark's suggestion, you have the piano and the other voices in one ear and your voice louder in another ear, so you can kind of really identify who it is you're singing along with. Should make it, I think, should make it a really kind of comfortable experience when you're recording, which is the whole point, so you can really do your best. So that's a little intro to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, one of the best pieces of music ever written, a piece that never gets old, never gets boring, only kind of gives and gives and gives. Go away and listen to it. There are lots of fantastic recordings. I can send round, if you like, I can send round some of my kind of top recordings, but really, there are so many, you can just pick any and you'll get a good experience from it. And crucially, we will, in a couple of months' time, add our own recording, which will be completely unique, something completely special, something, really the perfect way to mark Beethoven's 250th anniversary, singing this piece, which is all about universal kind of brotherhood, by kind of holding hands long distance across the world and singing together. It's such a pleasure to do this with you, so thank you. It's been great to see you all. Basses, I'll see you tomorrow at same time, same place, and then tenors on Tuesday, altos on Wednesday, sopranos on Thursday. You're always welcome to join another rehearsal, and sleep well.